Hi everyone. I see we have a few watching already. We're just waiting to get started for Gary to get here, but thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back later. Hi Gary, just so you know, we are already live. Um, so if you need to be doing anything, perfect. Hello.
Hey, Misty. It's good to
How's it
see you.
going?
It's going well. Yeah, I guess I got two different links. I was waiting on another link but it's all
Yeah,
good.
yeah, that's okay. It's been doing that, the scheduling app. So it's a Mercury retrograde lesson that we need to fix that.
I waited until one and I was like, maybe I should double check my email. So, yeah, it's all good.
Yes, that is just fine. We are already live. I don't know if you heard me or not. But
Hi,
basically,
everybody.
hi everyone. We have a few watching right now. It looks like people are still streaming in, so we can chit chat a little bit while
Awesome.
we wait on people.
Before I
But
forget, I want
yeah.
to say I'm really impressed with the job you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Gary. That means a lot.
Yeah, no, seriously. I was like, wow, it was it's not easy to take complex ideas and distill them down into something simple that people can grab a hold of. And you did it. And I saw
Thank
what you're
you.
doing over there on Substack as well, the Mercury Girl. It's great
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, I'm a fan.
Thanks, Gary. I used to be a technical writer, so that definitely helps with taking big
Uh-huh.
picture, hard to understand concepts and making it more digestible, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it shows. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks. I
Well,
appreciate that.
appreciate
Where are
you
you
too.
zooming in? What's that?
Appreciate you too.
Perfect. Where are you zooming in from?
I am in Southwest Virginia in the New River Valley, way the heck out in the middle of nowhere, and I love it.
Okay. I'm in the middle of nowhere too. It's
Are
pretty
you?
great.
Awesome. Yeah, good for you.
Yes. Yeah, it's nice and quiet over here.
What
Um,
part of the middle of nowhere?
I live in Missouri, just
Okay.
about 40 miles outside of the Springfield area. So I live in the country. There are lots of tiny
Missouri's
mountains,
beautiful. There's so
trees.
many springs, and
Yeah.
I was out there. I actually looked at buying some property out there once because there was like a trout farm or something that was the guy's
hmm
not selling. And I was amazed. There's like springs everywhere, and the water is like really beautiful.
Yeah, there are a lot of springs, beautiful water, a lot of caves too. We apparently have more
Mm.
caves than any other state. So that's pretty awesome. That
That's
means there are a
wild.
lot of
So,
bats.
yeah, there's a lot of like, that's where the springs come from, right? There
hmm
must be a lot of limestone.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
So that's
there's
similar to the region where I am. There's a lot of caves. And I went to college about an hour from here in Blacksburg, Virginia, at Virginia Tech. And we went caving. You know, there was like a cave club and stuff. And there's a lot of limestone. and then the
Hmm.
limestone being more porous and soft, it washes away, and that's how you get the caves. So that's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
had no idea.
It is wild. And there's supposedly like you talk a lot about like alchemy and the spiritual side of astrology in your book, and even just like supposedly that limestone is supposed to make this an energetic center, something or other. I don't know the exact verbiage, but there are a lot of energetically active locations
You
here, I would
know, I
say.
used to kind of roll my eyes when people would say, like, Sedona is supposed to be a vortex, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but I got to tell you, I think that's real. Like, there was a book when I was first getting into the spiritual community. It was called what's it called? It's like about these the second book was called The Tenth Insight. I can't remember what the first book was called now. It was by a guy named James Redman. But he talked
Hmm.
about these vortexes. And he talked about that Asheville, North Carolina was another one of them. And I've been to both those places, and I got to tell you, after living there, I'm a believer. And I
Perfect.
believe I believe your places too, because I was there and I could feel it. So
Oh yeah.
yeah,
There's something to it.
there's something about the land that activates, whether you want to talk about it in terms of like the Old English idea of like ley lines. They thought it was like they called it like the energy of the dragon. And that's why a lot of the kings had dragons. That's why Arthur Pendragon, the reason he used the symbol of the dragon is because the dragon was connected to the land. And what he was saying by that is I'm king by virtue of my connection with the land. So it's not I wasn't voted in. The land
Mhm.
chose me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty powerful, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. It looks like we have more people streaming in. So if you're good with it, I will go ahead
Yeah.
and jump into our
All right.
introduction.
Sounds good.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and welcome to the Kepler College Astrology Book Club Author Q&A. My name is Misty, and I'm your book club admin of our Facebook group. I'm here today with Gary P. Caton, author of our July book of the month, Hermetica Triptycha, the Mercury Elemental Year. And this always happens, but there's there's the book. Um, and it was very good, a very good read. Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah,
very
the
good.
green
Yeah.
screen situation.
Uh,
Can't help it.
uh,
Um,
yeah,
but
mine's
before we Perfect. That's a good view. That could be a good thumbnail. Before we jump into it, a few housekeeping announcements. I'd like to remind everyone that we have the Kepler College Substack up and running with our own newsletter just for book club. This newsletter features reviews written by our readers to share their thoughts on the book of the month. So if you have been reading Hermetica Triptycha with us and have any thoughts you would like to share on the book, you can email your reviews to me at misty@keplercollege.org. And the deadline for review submissions is on Thursday, August 7th. Let me pop my email into the chat box here.
That's awesome. I'm a
Yes.
fan of reviews, by the way. Whatever people have to say, I love to hear it. Um, it's a thing that writers are supposed to be aware of their audience, and I just love hearing people's stories, especially, of like how it how they sort of co contact the work and what it does, their journey with it. It's
Hmm.
it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps us become better writers even. So it just opens that connection between readers and seeing the value that people get out of your book,
Mm.
maybe what they might not get out of their book, and then that helps you become a better writer.
Yeah, there's,
But yeah,
if
reviews are
it's
really important.
Yeah, if it's legitimate constructive criticism, that's great too.
Absolutely. So please send in your reviews. That email is in the chat and get them to me by August 7th at the latest, please. Now, with announcements out of the way, allow me to introduce our author. Gary P. Caton is a transdisciplinary Hermetic practitioner integrating diverse traditions, art forms, and practices gathered over a full Saturn cycle. Initiated as an astrologer by a magnificent dream in 1993. That sounds really interesting to me. He's become a noted contributor to the 21st century Renaissance in astrology and astral magic. Gary is also an accomplished counselor, writer, podcaster, teacher, and photographer.
Wow.
So I
You're
will
on a
be
roll.
keeping.
You said my name right, and I love the read of my bio. It's not mechanical or anything. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it is mechanical on my end. I'm literally, if no one knows, I'm reading a little script that I wrote up just so I can make sure I cover
Couldn't
everything.
tell. Couldn't
Um,
tell. Yeah.
okay, perfect. Awesome. Now the secret's out there. Um, but everyone, I will be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have any questions along the way, please type them in the chat, ask us anything. If you've read the book, anything on the topic of the book, or any curious questions you might have about Mercury or the Mercury retrograde process, and the Mercury Cazimis as well. So I'll be
Which is
keeping an eye
today,
on the chat. It is
as
today.
we
It is
speak.
today.
Even as we
Um,
speak, we are in the heart of the sun.
we are in
We
the
should
heart
have
of the
that Pink
sun.
Floyd song playing in the background, set
I
control
love
to
that.
the
I
sun.
can see the vision. And how about I'll ask Gary this, but also the audience in general. How has everyone's Mercury retrograde in Leo been going so far?
Hmm.
How has today been for you? And how do you like to work with Mercury retrograde?
Hmm. Yeah, for me, it's really been inspiring, actually. I've felt like on fire as a writer again. And it's not always, that's not always, the case. Sometimes it's very difficult. Writing is like you're trudging through some kind of sludge, psychic sludge or whatever, and you just have to show up and keep at it. But I've actually been just like really, it's the difficulty in that part when you're really on fire with it is like staying focused because it's like
Mhm.
your mind, you just want to, talk about everything. And of course you can't do that.
Well, maybe you can just make a note of your ideas and then it can be an opportunity to revisit
There you
later.
go. Yeah,
There
yeah,
we
there
go.
you go. That's smart.
'Cause there is definitely value in the inspiration, even if we can't act on it immediately, I would say.
Mm,
Let me check the chat. My retrograde has been pretty good. It is transiting my eighth house, so that has been a little bit rough, but it has been overall very inspiring. And my takeaway so far is that I'm like, I need a dramatic change in my life right now to become a whole new person.
wow.
So we'll see what that looks
Interesting.
like.
So you're a
Very,
Capricorn rising?
yes, I'm a Capricorn rising.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sometimes the eighth house is a really deep house. And
Hmm.
sometimes it can show us things that we don't see usually because the reason why the eighth house is given the sort of connotations that it is because it's an inconjunct, it's a quincunx to, so if you think about earth and fire, they don't share a lot of qualities. There's a difficulty and there's not a Ptolemaic aspect between those houses. And so yeah, sometimes it can be really eye-opening when you have the eighth house activated, like wow, there's this deep stuff comes up that you may have not been seeing.
Yeah, that is, I would say, very much the case. I have my moon in the eighth house, and I would say,
Ah,
even just with my moon placement, it is often like I don't really see it all the time, and it's just boiling beneath the surface.
are you a
Um,
daytime birth?
yes.
Okay, so yeah, the moon is your out of sect light. Yeah,
Hmm.
see, I'm a night birth with the moon in the eighth, so I tend to be like, that's really the only thing I'm interested is what's under them. Like, tell me something I don't know, please. Like, I'm not really
Yeah.
interested in the obvious stuff. I'm always like digging, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so
I
it's
would say that is very a very present theme in your book, I would say.
yeah, yeah. It makes
Okay.
it difficult at parties because everybody's trying to have fun, and I just want to like psychoanalyze them or something.
Right. Yeah, it's not the most fun at parties. You might make someone cry on accident, but maybe they needed that.
Well, either
Yonatan
that
said,
or I get so wild that everybody's like, "Who is this nut?" You know?
hey, that's a good quality. We have another Capricorn rising in the
All
comments. Welcome
right,
to the club, Yonatan. It's a good rising sign to have, I would say. But speaking of digging beneath the surface, so about your book, um, I will do like a little bit of an introduction for people because we're on YouTube. Maybe not everyone has read this yet.
great.
Uh, but the book really covers what's known as the Mercury elemental year. And for those of you who maybe read along with us a few months ago on the Venus Star Point book, this is sort of a similar, very similar type of concept, a phenomenon that really tracks Mercury's retrograde process and the points and shapes that Mercury makes in particular anytime it conjuncts with the sun. So, in the first part of Gary's book, he introduces this concept to us and really showcases the triplicity of Mercury and how um, during the retrograde process throughout a year, the sun and Mercury will meet in the same elemental signs. So we're in a fire year right now. Current Mercury retrograde is in Leo. The previous one was in Aries. I think the one before that was in
Yeah, this
Sagittarius.
is, I think, like the fifth or sixth one in fire. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And so there is significance in your own natal chart as to where this happened before your birth. And so the book comes with an ephemeris in the back. If you don't have the book yet, you can pretty much use any ephemeris, but you will identify the Mercury retrograde that happened before your birth, and that tells you your Mercury elemental year.
And
So
if
now,
I may, specifically the
yeah,
Cazimi,
specifically the Kazimi.
the
Okay, perfect.
conjunction of the Sun and Mercury, because sometimes the retrograde can travel between two signs, but I'm tracking the sign of the Cazimi as the main one because that's where most of the retrograde's going to happen, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. And Gary, you explain it a little bit, not a little bit, you explain it a lot thoroughly in the beginning of the book, but for those who maybe haven't read along yet, can you summarize a little bit about the significance of which element you were born under for that?
Yeah. I sometimes when I'm reading um people, there's certain things that just stand out to me and I feel that they're really profound and I'm just like sort of obsessed with it and I have to like, okay, it feels profound to me and I know there's a lot more there. And so Erin Sullivan in her book, she did a book about all the retrograde planets. So this section in her book is just a few pages. But she literally says that this element that Mercury's retrograde in for the entire year is a collective influence. She uses that's not my paraphrasing. She uses those words. I thought, well, isn't that like most people? Oh, Mercury's a personal planet. It goes, the collective influences are the outer planets. So I was like, wow, that's because I had been studying with I had been studying Dane Rudjar and different people, and Michael Munchausen. I had been familiar with his work with the synodic cycles, where there are longer cycles, which is in the final chapter. I go into the 79-year cycle, right? Um, and so I was just really intrigued by this idea that there's a collective influence of Mercury, and because if you think about it. What's the one thing that all the people you graduated high school with share? Yeah, you all have, certain outer planet placements, but so does the year before and the year after, generally speaking.
Yeah.
The thing that sets your high school class apart from the one before and the one after, generally speaking, is going to be the Mercury elemental year. So I was like, wow, so it's almost like in winemaking, they have certain vintages, like certain years, the moisture was just right, the sunshine was just right, and it creates this just this gorgeous grape that's and the flavor is just incredible, like all everything just came together perfectly. Um, and in biodynamic agriculture, that would be fire years would be especially good for because they liken the elements to the different parts of the plant. I digress. But what but what showed up for me is like I don't have a whole lot of air in my chart, but I was born in an air year where the retrogrades were happening in air, and I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense to me because that element is going to show up more because of that. And B, I started watching, and it was just like really obvious. Like in 2010, we had the Arab Spring. And it was a fire year, and that whole thing started by a guy setting himself on fire, you know? And I was
Wow.
like, wow, like this is, and then, the whole region had these things called Days of Rage where they were just, protesting and everything. And I was like, wow, this is really like, this is collective. And it started out just in Tunisia, and then the next thing you know, the whole region. And then the Arab Spring turned into like, um, the American summer with the Occupy and stuff, and there was all of this really fiery energy in the collective, and I was like, and this is absolutely undeniable, and so that's when I really started to get serious about trying to understand this material and make it understandable for other people.
Wow. That's a lot to think about. I'll go back to what you said about just the generational aspect of this because I think there is really something to that. And through my studies so far, the gen it's all been about the generational planets when we're talking about people in your age group.
Yeah.
And I never quite like I get it. I personally never quite related to that too much because like my Pluto placement, pretty much everyone in my class growing up was Pluto and Sag, but I was born during that period where it was like retrograding and tiptoeing back into Scorpio.
Interesting.
And so I don't know, that generational and the generational planets, I've thought about that a lot and just what does that mean to me? So I might explore just my relationship to my peers more through that Mercury retrograde
Yeah.
point. So that's
Yeah,
a lot to think about.
specifically the one year that those people, and I mean, I still have lots of friends from high school, like it's a strong bond. Like there's people who show up and there's just something about having gone through that initiation together that's just it lasts, and yeah, there's a quality of the times that's kind of we all went through this fiery, tumultuous time together, and it that's what it's sort of ingrained in our soul, for lack of a better term, and that's what
Hmm.
bonds us with them.
Yeah, you're definitely going through the same things together, whether it's the pleasant things or the not so pleasant
All of
things
it.
of the people you
Yeah.
shared your class
Yeah.
with.
All of it.
And that really does create strong bonds.
Sometimes
Okay.
it's the challenging stuff that bonds people more than the happy, fun stuff, actually. There's been studies that show that.
Yeah, I think I learned that in therapy. Um, we do have a question in the chat. Yeah, I've seen this word before. I'm not quite sure what it means. So Yonatan, I might have you explain that. I think it's like an abbreviation for synergy. Um, SYZYGY. Gary, are you familiar with
Syzygy.
that?
Yeah.
What?
Syzygy.
Syzygy?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's a lunation.
Oh, okay.
It's so this technique that I'm using where I'm tracking the prenatal conjunction of Mercury and the Sun, um, this is not that unusual. It was a very standard technique to use the prenatal syzygy in different calculations, especially like with the almutin of the figure and some other classical stuff. It was not uncommon to think of the lunation before your birth as being sort of, and this is modern terminology, but being like a seed moment of something that then, so the idea is that the birth moment is a snapshot in time, but it's a snapshot of a dynamic process. The time is like a river that's always flowing. And yes, you were born at that moment in that river, but it was flowing from here and flowing to there. So the syzygy is the lunation before your birth. Um, and yeah, syzygy is just a name for, it's an archaic name for lunation. So the new and full moons are syzygies.
Okay, that is great to know. I'll add
Yeah.
that to my vocab sheet. But that is a great point that it is like a flowing river. And I think I'm starting to think of astrology in those terms more that time, like, yeah, it's a moment in time, but there was a bunch of stuff leading up to that moment, and there's a bunch of stuff that happens after that moment, and it's not an isolated moment by any means. So I think that's a
Right.
great perspective for us to have. And even just like you'll look at a birth chart, and even just like it's not just your chart, everyone at that moment was experiencing those transits and everything that led up to that
Yeah.
moment of your birth.
Yeah. When I was born, the whole country was on fire with the riots from the MLK assassination. So
Hmm.
when people look at my chart, they generally have two reactions. They go, "Oh," or they go, "Oh."
Oh no.
And it's like, yeah, that's kind of what was going on, you know?
That's what was going on. Okay. Let's see the comments. Sarah says they were born in the Mercury retrograde fire year.
Hmm.
That's so when it comes to connect back to what the elemental year means in like our birth charts. And you talk about trigons, what you call
Yes.
trigons. And we're looking for when we're looking in the ephemeris, that prenatal Sun Mercury conjunction. That's like the first point of this trigon. And then we next look to the Sun Mercury conjunction after the retrograde. And
Postnatal.
so postnatal, yeah. And so what can you explain the significance of that?
Yeah. So all three of these signs are going to be, so the idea is really simple. Mercury spends more time in the three signs of the fire trigon this year than all the other signs combined. Okay.
Hmm.
So there's a dramatic emphasis of that element. And so what we're looking for is, okay, what houses in your chart are affected by this dramatic emphasis of Mercury? Does you may not have your natal Mercury may be some and most likely is in some place very different. My natal Mercury's in Aries in the third house, but I was born in a year of the air trigon, and so the previous retrograde was in the Aquarius in my first house, and the following one was in Gemini in my fifth house. So these these houses are going to be sort of um, infused with the chaotic and counter-cultural and sort of um, back and forth, up and down, inside, outside, all this mixing of opposites that happens during the retrogrades. Those houses, you're going to feel that energy in those houses, even though there's may not be any planets there. I don't have any planets in my first or my fifth house, but that energy of those retrogrades is there, and you can sort of frame that and like, so the first house is it's about you, right? The fifth house is about your creativity, and the ninth house is about sort of like when you embrace who you are, you're able to make creative decisions from that, right? So the first house and the fifth house are related in that way. Like your creativity comes from your identity, actually. And then when you're able to make creative choices, it opens up new possibilities for you in the ninth house, right? So these
Hmm.
three houses are very much related. Same way with like the second house and the sixth house and the tenth house. If the second house is our stuff, and in that includes our tangible and intangible stuff. So, whether it be curiosity or spirituality, I have Pisces in the second house. I tend to value spirituality more than monetary stuff. It's a good
Hmm.
thing because if you're an astrologer, generally, it's a tough road. There's some people out there doing really well, and God bless them, but it wasn't easy when I was coming up. So the second house is your stuff. The sixth house is like what you do with that stuff. You build skills.
Hmm.
So whatever, gifts that you have, by practicing those gifts, you build skills, and then those skills lead you to career, right? And so
Hmm.
and then you can do the same thing with like the seventh house and the 11th house and the third house. The seventh house is about one-on-one relationships. The 11th house is about group relationships, specifically intra-group, within group relationships. And then the third house is about essentially intergroup relationships, because what is the local neighborhood made of but a group of neighbors? So relationships between households, intergroup relationships, whereas the relationships within the household are intra-group. See what I'm saying? So there's
Hmm.
basically three different kinds of relationships happening there. And then what have I missed? The fourth, the eighth, and the 12th. Right. So there's basically like three kinds of family. You have your biological family, your marriage and business family. And then, how people will say, they'll call their main, person at work, that sometimes they'll refer to them as their work wife or their work husband, or, like, this is
Yeah.
my person, right? For the 8 hours that I'm spending there. That's an intimate relationship. It's not necessarily physical, and most people probably hope it isn't, but
Yeah.
it's still intimate. They know you really well, a lot better than almost anyone other than your family, and then spiritual family would be in the 12th house. Um, so there's an interrelationship between these houses, specifically because they're involved in an elemental flow that gives them an energetic, it's a trine. It's a natural flow
Hmm.
between those elemental. And so it makes sense that those relationships between those houses would be accentuated because of this emphasis of Mercury being really active in those signs for a given year. And, like, to go back to my personal example, with the first house and the fifth house, when I came up as an astrologer, I was still drawing charts by hand and in the beginning, and like, giving out business cards, right, with my phone number.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's how old I am. But
Hey,
seriously,
I'm still giving out business
good for
cards, so
you.
it's come back.
Probably with your email though, or
Yeah, I don't want people to call me.
Yeah. I mean, so but yeah, no, that's great that you are because it's still like a an identifier or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, the point is that, there wasn't any internet, and
Hmm.
so it was a different the identity of an astrologer was pretty much tied to their local community. Most of their Now I did start to get clients that I had on the phone from and that was even a challenge because long distance charges, it used to be if you called beyond your local, like you could rack up hundreds of dollars of long distance charges, right? And that's expensive. But then they started to get in this thing, unlimited long distance. And I remember when I got unlimited long distance to Canada, and all of a sudden I had access to Canadian clients for the first time. And that was a big boost for my practice, you know. But then when the internet started coming along, there was people doing podcasting, and there was a couple guys in my town of Asheville, North Carolina, doing podcasting, and they invited me to be on their show. And it was fun. We had a great time. And one of my students was like, "Hey, you should have a podcast." And I was like, "I have no idea how to do that." And she's like,
Hmm.
"I'll set it all up for you." Well, if somebody's going to be that generous, what do you say? Okay, all right,
Yeah, you have
let's
to.
let's go. And so the next thing you know, I'm podcasting, and so this idea of the 1, 5, and 9 being about the identity trigon, like I was literally one of the first astrologers out there doing, not the first, the guys whose show I started with, they were the first ones. But I was like, there was like five of us at the time, I think, when I was doing podcasting. So there was a new identity being born into the world. Nobody did that before, like around the middle 2000s. It wasn't even available as an identity. Um, and so that shows up like in the Mercury retrogrades, like Mercury retrograde going against the flow, like doing
Hmm.
something literally look, I was working at home in 2008. I've been working at home since 2008, and it took until the pandemic for that to become normal.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that idea of like being um that that there's a challenge to embrace some kind of identity that's not normal, essentially, and I think it's really obvious in my life. And it was really interesting to see, Chris Renstrom did a review for the book that's on Amazon. And he had a little bit of difficulty with it at first because I think he was thinking like I was talking about his natal Mercury. And he was
Hmm.
like, "Gary, I don't understand what you're doing." And then I'm not sure what happened, but at some point he wrote me back and he's like, "Oh my God, I get it now." And it was literally like the celebrity example that I used to described his life. And he was like, "This is insane." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just like that. It's not going to happen that way for every single person, but
Yeah.
in case it did." And so yeah, there's this sort of, it's like you think about like bookends, right? Like you have,
Hmm.
like there's these bookends that it's a container for this. So before and after you were born, there are these influences that are sort of background influences, but it's like this container that's all the stuff that's going on that you think that's the stuff. But without that container, all that stuff wouldn't have a room to be in. It's kind
Right.
of like that.
It helps put those boundaries.
Contextualize it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah has a question. I think it's posed as a statement, but I'm going to ask it as a
All right.
question, Sarah. So Sarah says, Mercury went retrograde 2 days after her birthday. So in an event like that, if someone was born really close before um, like a Mercury retrograde, they're still looking at that pre-retrograde Cazimi, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I thought about this a lot. And unless somebody was born exactly on the day of the Kazemi, I'm thinking that the prenatal, you know, the prenatal is going to be literally like actually it's not prenatal, it's natal. It's like
Hmm.
in the sort of mommy sense of the word, like you were in your mother's womb. It's like, or it's neonatal, I guess is what they call it. It's
Hmm.
like that time, that formative time when you were, so that's a background. That's sort of like the Imam Coeli. It's like where you're coming from. And that postnatal retrograde. Now, for these people, there is an interesting difference. Even though I would suggest looking at the prenatal retrograde, I would also suggest that, and the idea is that you're moving from the house of the prenatal retrograde, kind of like an MM Coeli kind of in, where, or a south node, like you're coming from the south node going towards the north node.
Hmm.
So you're coming from the prenatal retrograde and then the house, and then somewhere like midway through life, the house with the postnatal retrograde is going to become more accentuated.
Okay.
Now
So
for
that
these
happens
people,
kind of later on in life.
yeah, if you think about it
Okay.
with secondary progressions, like depending on where you were, it's a 116-day cycle on average. So,
Hmm.
if you live to be 58 years old, that's me next year, then you're more than halfway through the cycle. So you're closer to the new one than you are. And if you were born at the end of the cycle, it might even be sooner, but that's just the average. But yeah, with these people that are born like really close or during the retrograde, it may be that they sort of move towards the postnatal retrograde earlier in life. Does that make sense? Because they're all born already closer to the next one. So
Yeah.
they might, so for some people, they might feel like that movement is slower, but for people born closer to it, it might show up because it's literally going to be in their secondary progressions,
Mm.
within what? Within the first half of life. Yeah. It'll be, sooner probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like in that case, we especially want to be checking our secondary progressions for more
Yeah.
info, I would say.
And
But
essentially
yeah,
you might actually even if you might actually by later in life, you might actually end up looking at all three,
right.
you
Mhm.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like that is a common occurrence. We have a bunch of people in the chat saying that they were born very close.
Imagine
So
that.
hopefully we answered that for you guys. Let us talk about working with Mercury retrograde. So you explain the elemental year, how it shows up in the natal chart in that first half of the book. The second half of the book, we get more into like the spiritual process, the alchemical process of Mercury retrograde. And you talk about it in three alchemical phases. So, can you explain a little bit, just in summary, about what those phases are and how we might experience that through a retrograde process?
Yeah, that was like such a profound discovery for me to find because I went through that process early in my life without any guidance. And fortunately for me, intuitively, somehow I found my way through it. Um, and I first got tuned into that in Demetra's Asteroid Goddess book. She talks about this three-step process of change with like Vesta and then Pallas and then Juno representing the three steps and then Ceres representing the process itself. She talks about it. And as I started working with it, I started realizing like this sounds similar to what they're talking about in alchemy. And in fact, it sounds similar to what they're talking about in Christian mysticism. There's in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey, there's this is a universal process, essentially, is what I found out. But in alchemy, they color code it. And so there's a blackening, nigredo, there's a whitening, albedo, and there's a reddening, rubedo. Now, alchemy is a complex subject, so there's also a four-step process in alchemy where you would add in citrinatus. There's a seven-step phase, especially when you're like working with metals and stuff. So the three steps, the simpler one, so I wanted to keep it simple. but there's an I the basic idea is like, look, and this is interesting because I recently saw somebody on Substack saying, quoting, Liz Green, where she said, every it's crazy because every time I see somebody's chart screaming change, profound changes in the air, they show up telling me they're stuck.
Uh,
She's like, it's almost like I'm beginning to be shown that stuckness is a prerequisite for change.
yeah, that's so real.
You know what I'm saying? And that's really profound. So stuckness and literally, and then when you're stuck, like if you get lurched out of a stuck place, typically like there's things kind of fall apart, maybe something breaks, or or it's a little bit chaotic. There's a sort of there's a this blackening, like the old way of being has to be put to rest
Mhm.
before a new way of being can be discovered. And that's just, if you just look at the process of nature, the leaves have to fall away and there's a period of rest and quiet in the winter before the spring can bring new life again. Um, and so winter would be the Negretto in the seasonal wheel of the year, right? So
Okay.
there's a necessity to embrace the the blackening. And then at some point in the process, and a lot of times, and that's why in like 12-step programs and in recovery and stuff, they talk about like, the rock bottom. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's in the darkest, deepest part of the night in the blackening process where you're going, oh my God, I'm literally dying here. Like, not necessarily physically, but you're just like really something happens and there's like this little bit of light. You can see this process pretty clearly in the final line of the arcana, the major arcana. If you divide the arcana into three lines, the major
Mhm.
arcana, the final line begins with the devil. It's about as blackening as you can get.
Yeah.
And then there's the tower. And then from the tower, we go to the star. So there's this sort of destructive energy that has to get away um from the stuckness. And those two people literally have chains on them. They're stuck.
Yeah.
So, and then there's this energy that breaks them out of their stuckness, and then they see the star. So there's this whitening, this albedo process that happens, and in the wheel of the year, it would be, like for instance, if I have apples. And so it's really easy to see if you watch fruit trees because what happens in the spring, the white blossoms come, right? And
Hmm.
there's this dramatic whitening that comes, and really, and then eventually there's this reddening that happens, and you get the fruit at the end of the year. And so the reddening is the ripening of this original insight. The blossom is like this light, this sort of awakening of a new potential. And then that has to be matured and ripened and solidified into a fruit. Um, and that's what the reddening process is about. And so once you understand that, I think it's a little bit easier to embrace the sort of chaos that sometimes comes with change because like, oh, okay, I'm in the blackening phase. All right. I know the whitening phase will come, and I know the reddening phase will come. It's a lot easier to breathe and go, okay, all right. There's a map. I know where I am. Like it sucks to be in the black for the moment, but I know I can get there, and so that to me was like such a profound development in my awareness that like that we can sort of give people, a hope and give them
Hmm.
tools and get and make and allow and help them understand that there's a process to this. It's not nihilistic. It's not just, that the universe hates you and is just making your life shit just because it can. And it can feel like that sometimes, you know. Sometimes you're like, what the heck?
Yeah. And that's one thing that I really love about the book, just because you really take the stance of not letting yourself become a victim to the transits, whether it's Mercury retrograde or otherwise. And I
Yeah.
think it's a problem that a lot of us have, especially those of us who are maybe newer to astrology or novices. We might take it like very literally. And, you know, let's say we're talking about like when I first got into astrology in my Placidus chart, I saw all of my Virgo planets in the eighth house, and I was like, oh my God, I'm doomed. I'm gonna die. And I think it's so easy when you're newer to astrology to just feel like a victim,
Mm.
but there is a way to really work with it. And make the best out of any like natal placement or transit. You can really make the best out of it. Usually, I would say.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's the thing is like, you know, strength is forged from struggle, right?
mhm.
We grow through struggle and you know, and in fact, you know, in Jungian psychology is really based on like that we need the struggle to keep growing and that in fact you know our psyche will invite seemingly disastrous events to get us out of these stuck places. And then when
Yeah,
you look back on it later, you go, you know what? I'm kind of glad that it's not like masochistic. Don't get me wrong. It's not that we like enjoy pain or something, but we, but sometimes the struggle is the price of liberation, you know? And so,
so
yeah,
true.
it's necessary.
So, another thing I love with about the book is that when we get into that talking about the alchemical process, you do use not use, you provide a lot of examples for exercises that one can do. And I highly recommend, if you haven't read the book already, anyone watching this, to get the book because the exercise examples are really fantastic and they can suit any type of person. So, in some of them, Gary gets really spiritual with it. In others, I remember you suggested making a vision board or something, or working in collage to make a mandala. So there's something for everyone in there.
Hmm.
Um, and another thing, back to not making yourself a victim of Mercury retrograde, there is that larger narrative when we talk about Mercury retrograde to avoid doing
Right.
things. And
Yeah.
it seems like you really don't recommend that. So,
The
how
ostrich
do you feel
approach.
about that?
Let me just hide.
Yeah,
You know, I mean, I get it. Like, you know, look, if I have, you know, plenty of time to plan and I've got to do something that's very mercurial, I'm probably not going to pick, my first pick is probably not going to be during the retrograde. Yeah, of course. Um, but, you know, I just don't think that we can really like afford to just put our life on hold for, you know, these long periods of time. I mean, when you get into this shadow stuff, and I'm not a fan of that concept for a variety of reasons. It's not astronomically accurate, most of all. Um, but you know, if you get into this idea that there's and it's true, there is some volatility before and after the retrograde, but it's really much more easily explained by the astronomy, and that's a whole nother subject. But then you're talking about basically half your life that you're putting on hold. It's like, man, I'm an Aries. Like like if you want me to wait and be on hold like 5 minutes max, and I'm just like, let's go, you know. And so,
yeah.
yeah, it's you know, and look, I've been all over this country giving astrology lectures, and I was out on the road with no phone, mind you, no smartphone, out on the road, you know, giving the astrology lectures. And yeah, I missed a few turns and whatever. There was some adventures, but it all worked out, you know. and I think that it's actually, and that this is what's interesting about the astronomy, because what if you understand the astronomy, what's happening in the retrograde is not simply a back and forth. There's a looping motion. Mercury will, and there's a variety of shapes to these loops, which is really fascinating. And that's a whole nother talk. But the point is that Mercury departs from the ecliptic during the retrograde. There's this sort of, think about Joseph Campbell's idea of the hero's journey. The
Mhm.
whole idea is that you have to get off the beaten path to find yourself. So there's this opportunity to discover something new, and you're never going to find it by hiding from it. You got to go out there and get in the mess to find, to get in the weeds to find the gold of self, essentially. And so, yeah, I mean, and the thing is, it's like if you think about it, like we know these periods, like they're perfectly predictable.
Mhm.
You know which houses of it, and so like you could even think ahead and be like, okay, my whatever house, right now for me it's my seventh house. So, um, and I just had a really interesting thing with partnerships last night. I got in touch with a guy I hadn't talked to, a mentor I hadn't talked to in a while, and he gave me a glowing recommendation, and it was right under the Mercury Cazimi in the seventh house, and I was like, I wasn't really, you know what I'm saying? I wasn't really. But yeah, what do I want to do with that house that sort of either goes back, like retrogrades back, or does something different? Like just say, I'm going to do something different with that house, and then
Mhm.
at least you're in charge of it. It's still going to be an
Yes.
adventure probably, but you're agreeing to go on the adventure rather than being drug along. It's like there's nothing worse than like when you're hanging out with somebody and there's something they want to do and they got to drag you along it's like if you're gonna do it, like like show up, like go and do the thing. Don't just be like okay, fine, and the whole time you're like, like
Yes.
that's no fun. That's right. So it's kind of like that. It's like it's called buy-in, I guess, right? Just agree to the adventure, embrace the adventure of it, and it's probably going to be a lot better experience.
Right. It's
Yeah.
a better experience when you're aware and you know what you're going into. I love that, especially just thinking
Yeah.
about where it's showing up in your chart. One thing that I do, which I giggled at when I saw your suggestion for a vision board, because I make Mercury retrograde dopamine menus. And if you don't know what a dopamine menu is, it's like a coping tool for people with ADHD. So in the traditional menu, they'll put easy activities that they can do to maybe help them get out of a slump and find some healthier, more focused activities. And then my Mercury retrograde version of it is to just think, okay, where is this showing up in your chart and what are some related activities that you can do with that? And I found that it does feel more empowering to do something
That's
like that and then
cool.
you're able to feel more
And
prepared.
you were already doing that on your own.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
loved that.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
We do have a question from Talk Cosmos. They
Awesome.
say, if my repeat cycle is when I'm 92, since the book only goes to 80, do the 7 years repeat? And I'd be in the second phase. That would be 12 to 14 years. So
Wow.
this is talking about the returns that yeah,
Yeah,
that's a
wow.
great question.
Well, first of all, I'm so happy for you that you get to ask that question. Like, wow, like it's amazing to be, and thank you for being here asking that question. Um, yes, so so of course the cycles just keep rolling, and there's another way to look at it. Like you can actually go back to, how your life has certain points like where you're like, oh my God, I feel like a totally different person than I was, say, at this age or whatever. But there was an event in the middle somewhere that was the turning point to this new person. you can go back to places like that and like consider it like a birth of some kind and kind of look from there where that cycle is unfolding from that as a starting point rather than like your physical birth from your mother. So that's one way that I would think about working with it is like where's my like the local like the person I am today, where did that really start? And then like look where I am in the process of the 7 year elemental returns from there. Um, but yeah, I mean, you're not exactly going to be like a 14-year-old per se, but the basic process is the same in that there will be a repeat of there's one, two, three, so there'll be a Negretto, Albedo, and Rubetto, and there will be so that's the albedo stage of that of those three returns, number one. Um, so there will be something that should be like coming up from a place of stuckness, and those should be this light, this new light that's available. So yeah, the general process should still be the same. Um, but yeah, if it were me, like my first thought is I would go back to just whatever feels like the most recent starting point in your life. Maybe like when you retired, I don't know, something like that, and see if you can sort of get and use that as like year zero, and see if you can get a sense of where you are developmentally from there. And that might be a little more productive because yeah, unfortunately, there's only so much room. I mean, I would love to have made the book a lot longer, but um, at some point you just got to say, okay, I got to get it out there, you know?
There's a lot to think about and just to reflect on in general when it comes to this book. I think that's going to send me along a new rabbit hole to go down. But
That'd be
we
a good
are out
one.
of time. So if anyone has any final questions, pop them into the chat. Otherwise, I am putting the book club link on Facebook into the chat in case you want to share any afterthoughts or ask any questions in the group and you're on Facebook. Please feel free to make a post in the Facebook group. And then a reminder, uh, she says, but Gary, I mean, this would be my Mercury elemental return. So I guess it'll have something for that time. It's a deep book, and thank you so much.
Okay,
Thank
you're
you,
welcome.
Sue.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Um, and again, we are on Substack now. We have a special newsletter just for our book club, and I'm taking reviews on Gary's book, Hermetica Triptycha, until August 7th. You can email those to me at misty@keplercollege.org. Popping that into the chat right now. And let me grab the Substack link for you again. And I love Substack, everyone. If you're not on Facebook and you don't want to be on Facebook, Substack is great. You don't have to have a Substack account to subscribe to our newsletter. And so I think it's a great solution for those of us who aren't super plugged in on Facebook to stay involved with the club. And it looks like there are no final thoughts for now. So thank you so much to Gary for
Yeah,
joining
thank
us,
you.
and thank you to everyone who attended the live stream today, and those of you who have been reading with us throughout the month. We will not have a book of the month for August, as the Kepler College team is really gearing up for our symposium in Niagara Falls. That will be from September 4th to the 7th. I'm going to make a poll both in the Facebook group and the Substack newsletter just to get a pulse check on if any book club members plan on going to the symposium, because I would love to have even just a little meetup during one of the happy hours for people in the book club. I think it would be great to chit chat, meet you all. So let us know if you'll be coming for that. And you're welcome, even though we're not doing Book of the Month, you are still welcome to make posts about astrology books in the book club or any astrology blogs that you've been reading lately. It would be really nice for you to share that. But again, thank you so much for coming, everyone, and I hope you
Thank you,
enjoy
Christine.
the